because my father took me to the library, went to the video section, and we rented out The Killing Fields.
How'd you get busted in 12th grade?
We was doing residential robberies.
The failure of the American Refugee Resettlement Program.
I recognized him. I knew he was in the movie The Killing Fields.
I initially thought that I was a U.S. citizen because of the fact that, both my parents became U.S. citizens.
Imagine if you were Cambodian in the early 1980s. Your country is carpet bombed for years amid an increasingly bloody communist revolution. You keep your wits about you and survive the genocidal dystopia of the Khmer Rouge period. You flee to a refugee camp in Thailand when yet another aggressor, this time Vietnam, invades. Then you learn you're being resettled in the United States to start your life again. At long last, it sounds like you've won the lottery, right? Not necessarily. Unresolved trauma might impede your ability to function.
It wasn't until I was a full adult that I realized that he suffered from PTSD.
You and your kids might be a little naive.
The neighborhood that I lived in was all white, but the school that I went to was all black.
Was that another form of culture shock?
It was, because I didn't think people come in different colors like that.
In this new world, gang life becomes a sad reality for many Cambodian refugee families as the next generation is forced to survive on the streets in places like Long Beach, California, and Lowell, Massachusetts, with limited refugee support. Even that's not the end of the story. Years later, some former child refugees discover they aren't American citizens because their parents didn't understand the citizenship process. If they commit a felony, or even just a couple of misdemeanors? Since 2002, the U.S. has been deporting them back to Cambodia, where many have never stepped foot, have limited language skills, and which they know primarily through the nightmarish memories of the previous generation. Welcome. This is episode 3 of Who Killed Haing Noor, a real-time and crowdsourced podcast in which we explore both lingering questions about the murder and issues connected to the legacy of Dr. Haing S. Noor, the actor and political activist who's probably best known for his role in The Killing Fields. A quick shout out before we start to Hannah Beach from the New York Times for her 2018 article on this topic, which was the first I read about it. I'll link to that on the Who Killed Haing Noor webpage. In this episode, I'm speaking with 2 former gang members. First, there's JC from Long Beach and TRG, the Tiny Rascals Gang, one of LA's most notorious Asian gangs. And I'm talking with Prosper from Lowell, Massachusetts, in the East Coast wing of TRG, where they're known as Blue Rags. Each one was involved in a homicide, did time, and then got deported. Both are now living in Cambodia's capital, Phnom Penh. Each has extremely limited memories of his early childhood, but what they do remember is vivid.
Well, I remember later at night, my dad pulled me off the bed, and I remember falling off the bed and hitting my head on the bamboo slat floor. And then so much commotion was going on. Everybody was gathering some things. I hear bombs. I hear gunfire. That's
JC. Some of his earliest memories are from when his family fled western Battambang province for the Thai border in 1979, the year Vietnam invaded. He was 6, going on 7.
We hid in one of this hole that we had found from the shells, spent the night at the hole. Woke up in the morning, found out it was like a mass grave. That the hole was dug out with it, threw all the dead body in there. We didn't know because it was so pitch black we couldn't see inside.
Prosper from Lowell was born in the Khao Dang refugee camp in Thailand in 1981. He has 2 memories. One was seeing his parents working in a rice field.
The second vivid memory for me is when I was on the airplane ride over to the United States. The first time I heard music, having to experience headphones in my ears in the plane ride really made me remember that moment of just hearing music inside my ear on the way to America.
As admirable as it may have been for the U.S. to throw open its doors to hundreds of thousands of refugees from the Indochina conflicts, that support dried up pretty quickly.
When you put people who don't speak English in crowded inner cities on welfare, with minimal support, guidance, counseling doesn't work very well.
That's Bill Harrod, the founder of the Khmer Vulnerability Aide Organization, KVAO, which helps Cambodian deportees resettle in Cambodia. Since 2002, they've helped resettle 772 people.
It works when local NGOs, local churches, and so forth get involved and take responsibility. But many times these people were put in very crowded inner city conditions, surrounded by violence and drugs and gangs and so forth. And since the parents didn't speak the language, they weren't able to provide much guidance.
It's as if the refugee experience bred a generation of lost boys and girls, but it's predominantly young men and boys who are jumped into gangs. That's when a new gang member is beaten up by everybody else as a form of initiation. Looking back now, Prosper says he was in search of a role model that his father couldn't live up to.
I never really wanted to join a gang because back then I was involved with hip hop. I used to dance, I used to break dance, and I was into music and things like that. But growing up with people who were in gangs, I was around gangs, as a child. And it was at the age of 17 that a friend, an older gentleman whom I looked up to, was like, why don't you just join our gang? It's like, we're already like family. I known you since you was a kid. And I was young and still searching for myself, and I just agreed to why not? The next day after I got jumped in, I told my best friend that I made a mistake.
JC was that voice earlier who didn't know people come in different colors. He also admits he was naive enough that he didn't know he was in a gang for weeks, if not months. His family had just moved to Long Beach, having previously been settled elsewhere. It began when his cousin, who was meant to be hanging out with him, left 15-year-old JC alone in a park.
While I'm on the bench, that's when 15 guys approached me. I remember they asked me where I was from. And me not knowing that was a gang term, like what neighborhood you from, I answered, I'm from Minnesota. And so they go, okay, you're not from California, I'm not from Minnesota. I just moved over here. And they liked talking to me. Then they asked me, well, you mean you want to go for a ride? I'm like, well, I'm making new friends. I say, sure, why not?
They went for a ride in what turned out to be a stolen vehicle, leading to JC's first arrest. He was released without charges.
And then the next day later, we went to the park again, that those guys saw me again. They go, oh, we liked you. I say, why? Well, because yesterday you didn't say anything. And so because I didn't say anything, to the cops, they respected me for it. I couldn't give any name because I didn't know nobody's name.
Looking back now, did they have tats and stuff? Did they look like a gang in retrospect?
Back then, it wasn't about tattoos. It was about hair colors. They had hair colors. They dyed their hair like a reddish blonde or golden blonde. I didn't even know that it was gang at first. I thought it was like some kind of club or some kind of just boys and girls hangout people. It wasn't until later on that I realized, oh, these guys are gangs. Because the only gang that I know about is New York. I've watched the movie called The Warriors. That's the only gang I even heard about.
It went downhill from there. The Tiny Rascals soon adopted a much more macho posture, now with the baggy clothes and gang tattoos. They felt like they had to protect the Cambodian community from rival black and Latino gangs. JC went from stealing cars and car parts to what would be his downfall, breaking into people's houses. One night, JC was ransacking a house while his friend was holding the homeowner at gunpoint.
I heard a gunfire, and I looked outside and I seen my friend was shooting at one of the men. When that happened, everybody ran, but the man died. So now from residential robbery, it leads to murder.
Prosper's life followed a similar trajectory. TRG routinely got into fights with rival gangs, to which he brought knives or a baseball bat. He was 25 when he went to what was meant to be a perfectly ordinary birthday party. But an argument broke out between two members of TRG.
things was too fast. Just one thing led to another, and without warning, my co-defendant pulled a gun out and shot him.
Neither JC nor Prosper have any direct knowledge of the murder of Haing Nor in 1996 by 3 members of another LA gang, the Oriental Lazy Boys. JC was already in prison, Prosper lived on the other side of the country, but both had a sense of connection to him.
I know who he was. I even met him. I met him in Long Beach. We was driving together, and he parked. His car was right next to mine. And we looked at each other. He waved at me, and I waved back at him. I recognized him. I knew who he was. He was in the movie The Killing Fields.
So what was your reaction when you heard that he got killed?
And I heard he got killed. I was sad. I was sad because the fact that this man went through so much. He put Cambodia on the map with that movie. I mean, he put awareness out there of what happened to us. I mean, I was doing robbery, but he was one person that I would never rob because of that. If I would have robbed a house and he was in there, I'd walk back out.
Prosper thinks he was 7 or 8 years old when his dad decided it was time he learned some history.
My father took me to the library and went to the video section, and we rented out The Killing Fields for the first time, and we went home and sat and watched the movie, and that was how he explained to me what he went through with my mother and things like that during that horrific time. And in his own way, that was one of the best ways for him to explain to me what he went through, because it wasn't until I was a full adult that I realized that he suffered from PTSD. And you know, I would go to wake him sometimes because he was being called, and he would jump up ready for action. And you know, it always used to amaze me why he would react in such a fashion. I realize now that was PTSD.
Haing Nor comments several times on what he calls depression in his memoir, A Cambodian Odyssey, how burdened he felt by his past. Had he lived, chances are he'd have learned along with the rest of us about the prevalence of PTSD among survivors of war. JC got sentenced to 34 years to life. He had just turned 18. He did 30 years till 2018 and then got deported. Doing time meant taking a hard look at himself.
As a lifer in prison, you have to take therapy classes. I took so many therapy classes, self-help therapy classes. I must have like 150 certificates. To the point where I started off taking classes and end up teaching classes.
JC did more than that. He worked as a youth counselor, speaking with groups of at-risk teens who were brought into the prison for special programs. And he just kept going.
I don't drink, but I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. And so I was asked, you don't drink at all. We have no record of you having any kind of alcohol problem. So why did you go to Alcoholics Anonymous? And I said, sir, I may not have an alcoholic addiction. I said, but I do have a gang lifestyle addiction. Right? I said, addiction is still addiction. So I go to AA. I may not be alcoholic, but I may have friends or family members that are alcoholic, and taking this class will allow me to understand what they go through and how to help them. You know, you go, oh wow, we didn't think about it that way. I said I had to. I mean, any self-help class in here, I'm going to take because I know it's going to benefit me one way or the other. Parenting class. Well, I'm not a parent when I was in prison. I'm a parent now, but because of those classes, I know how to treat my son. I know how to take care of my wife. I mean, everything that I learned now, it's because of prison.
Prosper got 15 years to life for second-degree murder. He says he took the rap for his buddy with a gun because he didn't want to be known as a snitch, either within TRG or in prison. He says he's not the same person he was in 2006 when he went to that birthday party.
Well, I matured because I wanted to better myself. I really analyzed why, you know, what led me up to the point that I was at. And I was facing life in prison, and I was determined to make something and to learn about myself and to educate myself, as opposed to just not doing nothing and withering away in prison, because I had a main goal was to return back to my children.
Prosper's children were 4 and 5 years old at the time. His kids weren't his only motivators. It was also prison old-timers, the OGs.
Some of the old guys who have been through all the bullshit, they seen the stabbings and all that, and they give you a lot of their experiences, and you learn from them. That's one thing that I really did well, was learn from other people's mistakes. When they say go get an education, my first year in the maximum prison, I got my GED. I helped other people who were taking college courses with their homework. So that got me into the education field, where I eventually had gotten myself into those courses also, and I went to college in prison. I've earned 2 scholarships while I was in prison, one from Tufts University for an associate's degree, and one from Boston College for a bachelor's degree. And if I didn't make parole, I would have earned my degree with Boston College.
I reached out by email to fact-check that, and a Boston College professor who taught Prosper in prison confirmed it for me within minutes, adding that Prosper was one of their best students. I'll put a link to the Boston College Prison Education Program on the Episode 3 webpage. Prosper was thinking of majoring in sociology or psychology. He hadn't decided yet. But when parole came round, so did his citizenship question.
I initially thought that I was a U.S. citizen because of the fact that, both my parents became U.S. citizens.
That wasn't the case. This is typical of refugee communities, where new arrivals are simply unaware of or don't understand the law. JC's parents were like that too. And think about it, even if you spoke and read English really well, in the 80s and into the mid-90s, you couldn't just look up an answer to a complicated citizenship question on the internet. Prosper's father had become a naturalized citizen before Prosper was 18. His mother wasn't naturalized till he was 20. And that's all it took. The law at the time said that for people born before 1983, like Prosper, both his parents had to gain citizenship by the time he was 18 so that he could too. But his mom had completely unknowingly missed a deadline that would have allowed her son to become American.
I did 15 and a half years. When I got parole, ICE came to grab me right away from prison. And I did 6 months in detention before I got deported. So I've never got a chance to go see my family or touch, the streets without shackles.
I mean, you lined up 2 remarkably resilient people for me to interview, but did you line up the A+ students for me? I mean, do people rebound as well as JC and Prosper?
Well, we got people who were willing to talk with you, of course.
Here's Bill Harrod again from KVAO.
But I think they're representative of guys who are trying to make it work. JC, of course, has been in Cambodia for several years. Prosper is quite new. He's been there less than a year. We do have a dozen people in prison for crimes allegedly committed in Cambodia. And we work with a group of people who've come back who have problems with substance abuse. So there are all kinds of, with 772, there's a wide variety of experiences. But I think JC and Prosper are good examples.
By now you've probably figured that both Prosper and JC are determined to make the most of their second chance at freedom. They are highly motivated human beings. JC's gotten married to a Cambodian woman and has 2 small sons. He and Prosper have both gotten work in Phnom Penh teaching English. Still, moving to Cambodia definitely takes some adjustment. I'm not using JC or Prosper's legal names by request because there's still stigma attached to being an ex-con, and the injustice of deportation still stings. Prosper's son, who was 5 when he went to prison, he's in the U.S. Army now and just completed his first tour of duty overseas. Prosper's daughter is in college.
I consider myself an American, and for me to get deported back to a country that I've never stepped foot in because I was born in a refugee camp, I think that's kind of unfair, because family that I do know and love are over there, and it hit me hard, but it hit my son harder, and my daughter hard, because of the fact that they couldn't believe that their country would send their father away from them, especially for my son who is fighting for their country.
I believe that everybody is entitled to have a second chance, especially if they're showing signs of rehabilitation. They take responsibility for themselves.
JC and Prosper are unlikely to ever be allowed to legally return to the United States. One thing I really need to point out is that it's not just people involved in homicides or other serious crimes who get deported. The bar is much, much lower than that. Here's Bill Harrod.
A non-citizen can be deported for life for a felony conviction, and under immigration law, a felony conviction can consist of 2 misdemeanors. You know, if you're caught with marijuana for personal use once, that could be a misdemeanor. If it happens again, that could be a felony, and you could be deported for life.
There's a bill before Congress called the New Way Forward Act that aims to reform the contentious and highly politicized issue of U.S. immigration. As written, it gives judges the discretion to review removal in individual cases, something that could have benefited Prosper and JC, who'd become assets to their communities. It was introduced in the House in 2021 and is now in committee, so there's a long way to go before maybe it becomes law. If there's one thing that's clear, Prosper and JC are survivors, not just of gangs in prison, but in their own ways of the Khmer Rouge. They were the cataclysm that started this all off and made refugees out of their parents. My hunch is that each will make a life for himself in Cambodia, the first time in decades that neither has been under threat. JC gets the last word.
Put it this way, I have never felt so much freedom until I'm here. I don't have to look over my shoulder. I don't have to find out who's following me. I don't have to find out who's going to hit me up, what gang am I from, or I don't have to worry about my enemies trying to jump me. I don't worry about that here. In Long Beach, I worry every time I come out of the house.
Thank you for listening. My name is MP Noonan. Remember, this is a crowdsourced podcast, an experiment in journalism. If you knew Haing Nor personally and would like to contribute even just an interesting anecdote, please get in touch. If you know any details about the murder you think are relevant, please get in touch. The best way to reach me is by email at whokilledhaingnor@gmail.com. Haing is Haing and Nor is Ngor. Thanks again.